The Veltari Council was dying. Their beautiful blue and green worlds were turning into empty, dead rocks. For 3 long months, the nightmare had been spreading across their space like a disease. The hive ships came without warning, appearing from the dark void between stars. These weren't normal spaceships made of metal and circuits. They were alive. Massive creatures that looked like jellyfish crossed with sea monsters, their translucent skin pulsing with veins of stolen energy from the worlds they devoured. Each hive ship was the size of a small moon, covered in writhing tentacles that could crack open planets like eggs. They would descend on a world and begin feeding immediately. First, they drained the oceans, sucking up every drop of water. Then they consumed the forests, the grasslands, even the soil itself. Nothing was left behind except a barren husk of rock floating in space. The worst part was that they were getting bigger and stronger with each world they ate. Admiral Tess Morgan had been patrolling the outer rim of human space when the transmission came through. She was aboard the USS Defender, a sleek warship that had been keeping watch for threats from the unknown regions beyond their territory. The message was broken and filled with static, but the desperation was clear in every word. "Unknown vessels, this is desperate plea from Veltari people," the alien voice crackled through the speakers. The translation software struggled with the strange language, but the meaning came through. "We offer technology exchange for military assistance against hive threat. We detected your world in quarantine zone. Please respond." Down in the communications center, Captain Jake Williams was staring at his screens in disbelief. He had been monitoring alien signals for 15 years, but this was different. This was a cry for help from a civilization on the edge of total destruction. The data packets that came with the message showed images that made his stomach turn. Beautiful worlds that looked like Earth, covered in blue oceans and green continents, reduced to lifeless chunks of gray rock. The Veltari themselves looked like a cross between rabbits and small deer. They had large, gentle eyes and soft fur covering their bodies. In the video messages, Jake could see the terror in their faces as they pleaded for help. Their cities were elegant and peaceful, built in harmony with nature. Everything about them screamed that they were prey animals who had never known real war. "Sir, Command wants to know our assessment," said Lieutenant Dan Foster, his communications officer. The young man had been tracking the alien broadcasts for hours, piecing together the terrible story of the hive invasion. Jake pulled up the tactical data on his main screen. The bioships were unlike anything in human military databases. They moved like living creatures because they were living creatures. Each one had a central nervous system that controlled thousands of smaller organisms. They hunted in packs, coordinating their attacks with frightening intelligence. But there was something about their behavior patterns that reminded Jake of something familiar. He had grown up on a farm in Ohio before joining the military. Every summer, his family dealt with swarms of locusts that would descend on their crops. The insects would strip entire fields bare in a matter of hours, moving from farm to farm in massive clouds. The hive ships operated the same way, consuming everything in their path before moving on to the next target. Jake smiled grimly as he thought about how his grandfather had dealt with the locust swarms. "Tell them we're going to need the heavy fleet for this one," he said to Lieutenant Foster. "Looks like pest control duty." The lieutenant raised an eyebrow. "Pest control, sir." "That's exactly what this is, Foster. These hive ships are just insects on a galactic scale. Big, nasty insects that need to be exterminated before they spread any further." Jake began typing up his report to Earth Command. "And lucky for these rabbit people, humans have been dealing with pest problems for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at it." As the USS Defender changed course toward Veltari space, Jake couldn't help but feel a familiar excitement. Humanity had been stuck in their corner of the galaxy for decades, wondering if they were alone. Now they had their answer, and it came with the chance to do what humans did best: protect the innocent and eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. The USS Thunderstrike dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veltari home system, and Captain Jake Williams immediately knew the situation was worse than anyone had imagined. Space around the beautiful blue-green planet was filled with thousands of refugee ships. They weren't military vessels but civilian transports, medical ships, and cargo haulers packed with fleeing families. The ships looked like they had been designed by artists rather than engineers, all smooth curves and elegant lines that caught the light of the system's twin suns. But what caught Jake's attention were the massive burn scars on the planet's surface. From orbit, he could see where entire continents had been stripped bare. The hive had already begun feeding on the Veltari homeworld before being driven back by some kind of desperate last stand. Whatever these rabbit-like aliens had done to buy themselves time, it had cost them dearly. When the first Veltari delegation came aboard the Thunderstrike, Jake watched their reaction carefully. He had seen this before when humanity made contact with other species. The moment the airlock opened and the aliens got their first look at humans, their large eyes went wide with instinctive fear. Everything about human evolution screamed predator to prey species like the Veltari. The lead alien, who introduced himself as Elder Nith, was about 4 feet tall with soft gray fur and long ears that twitched nervously. His delegation of 5 other Veltari pressed close together as they walked through the ship's corridors. Jake noticed how they flinched at every sound and kept glancing at the human crew members they passed. The humans, for their part, moved with the confident stride of apex predators, their forward-facing eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Your people," Elder Nith said in heavily accented English, his translation device struggling with human speech patterns, "they are all warriors." Jake shook his head. "Most of my crew are just regular people doing their jobs. Engineers, doctors, communications specialists. But we all train for combat. Every human does." The elder's ears flattened against his head. "All of your people learn to fight. Where we come from, everything wants to kill you," Jake explained matter-of-factly. "Storms that can level cities, wild animals that hunt in packs, diseases that wipe out entire populations. We learn to fight back or die. It's just how we are." While Jake gave the Veltari leaders a tour of the ship, Commander Lisa Hayes was in the tactical center running analysis on the hive bioships. She had 20 years of military experience, having fought in the colony wars and the robot uprising on Mars. But this was different. The enemy wasn't using technology they could understand and counter. These things were alive, and they were smart. "Your enemy uses biological warfare," Lisa explained to a group of Veltari military advisors. The aliens' fur literally stood on end as she described human military doctrine. "But they're not the first biological threat we've faced. We've dealt with engineered plagues, mutant animals, even sentient plant life that tried to terraform our colonies." One of the Veltari officers, a female with white markings around her eyes, asked in a trembling voice, "You fight in coordinated packs like the hive creatures?" Lisa smiled, though she could see it made the aliens nervous to watch a predator bare its teeth. "We call it combined arms warfare. Air support from fighters and bombers, ground troops with heavy weapons, orbital bombardment from our ships, electronic warfare to disrupt enemy communications, and specialized units for different threats. Everything working together like parts of the same machine. The hive won't know what hit them." The Veltari exchanged worried glances. Their own military was based on defensive formations and retreat tactics. They had never conceived of warfare as something that could be coordinated across multiple domains simultaneously. Jake excused himself from the delegation to send an encrypted transmission back to Earth Command. "Admiral Peterson, this is Captain Williams reporting from Veltari space. The situation is worse than our initial assessment. The hive bioships are larger than anything in our databases, some over 50 kilometers in length. But they're still using biological systems, which means they have the same weaknesses as any living organism. We're going to need the full war fleet for this operation, including the chemical warfare specialists and the new plasma weapons." The response came back within hours. Earth was mobilizing everything they had. The Veltari refugees watched in amazement as humans began planning their counterattack with cold, mechanical efficiency. They set up holographic battle maps, ran computer simulations of Hive ship vulnerabilities, and calculated supply lines and logistics with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. To the peaceful Veltari, it was both terrifying and fascinating to watch predators prepare for war. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear apart as humanity's war fleet arrived at the Veltari system. One by one, massive ships materialized from the swirling vortexes of hyperspace jumps. First came the scouts and fast attack craft, sleek vessels bristling with sensors and missile launchers. Then the heavy cruisers appeared, their armored hulls scarred from previous battles across the galaxy. Finally, the dreadnoughts emerged like metal mountains, so large they cast shadows over the smaller ships around them. Admiral Tom Carter stood on the bridge of the flagship Annihilator, watching his fleet take formation through the massive viewport. At 2 kilometers long, his ship was a floating fortress covered in weapon batteries, missile silos, and defensive systems. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, coordinating the arrival of 300 warships that represented the full might of human military power. Fleet status report, Carter commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had spent 30 years fighting humanity's enemies. All ships have arrived and are assuming battle positions, reported his tactical officer. Weapon systems are online, shields are raised, and fighter squadrons are ready for launch. From the observation deck of a nearby Veltari hospital ship, Elder Nith watched the human fleet with a mixture of awe and terror. The Veltari had built their ships to be beautiful, with flowing lines that mimicked the curves of ocean waves or the graceful arc of a bird's wing. Human ships looked like they had been designed by someone who had never heard the word beauty but understood violence perfectly. Every surface of the human vessels was covered in weapons. Missile pods stuck out like angry spines. Laser cannon turrets rotated constantly, scanning for targets. Particle beam arrays ran along the ship's hulls like glowing veins. Where Veltari ships were painted in soft blues and greens, human ships were dark gray and black, designed to blend into the darkness of space. "Sweet mother of stars," Nith whispered to his aide, his ears pressed flat against his head in fear. "How many weapons do they need on one ship?" The question was overheard by Colonel Mike Davis, whose assault ship had just docked with the Veltari vessel. He was a stocky man with graying hair and scars on his hands from 20 years of ground combat. When he smiled, it reminded the aliens uncomfortably of a predator showing its fangs. "In our experience," Davis said, checking the ammunition counter on his plasma rifle. "More than we bring. That's why every human ship carries enough firepower to level a city. We learned a long time ago that there's no such thing as overkill when you're trying to stay alive." He gestured toward his troops, who were busy unloading crates of equipment from their transport. "But don't worry about the big guns. We brought something special for these bug ships. Chemical warfare specialists, biological weapons experts, even a few guys who used to work in pest control back on Earth." The Veltari delegation looked confused. Chemical warfare was something their peaceful civilization had never developed. The concept of using poison as a weapon seemed barbaric to creatures who had evolved as herbivores. Dr. Rebecca Brooks emerged from the laboratory section of the assault ship, her white coat stained with various chemicals and her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. She had been studying the hive tissue samples that the Veltari had managed to collect from dead bioships, running tests that would have horrified the gentle aliens if they truly understood what she was doing. "I've got good news," she announced, pulling up a holographic display of hive nervous system structures. "These things might look scary, but they're just oversized insects when you get down to the cellular level. Their nervous systems are vulnerable to compounds we've been using to kill garden bugs for hundreds of years." She pointed to a complex molecular diagram. "See this? It's the same neurotransmitter pathway that controls movement in Earth insects. We pump enough modified pesticide into these bioships, and their hive mind becomes a liability instead of an advantage. Every ship in their fleet will start having seizures at the same time." Colonel Davis nodded approvingly. "That's the thing about humans. We've been fighting pests since we learned to grow crops. Locusts, termites, killer bees, brain-eating parasites, you name it. We've developed chemical weapons for all of them. Admiral Carter's voice echoed through the comm system. All ships, this is Fleet Command. Intelligence reports indicate the main hive force is approaching from the outer system. They're moving in a standard feeding formation, probably expecting to find defenseless prey like they've encountered before. Time to show them what happens when the prey fights back. The human fleet began moving into attack formation, their engines creating brilliant points of light against the star field. For the first time since the hive invasion began, the Veltari refugees felt something they hadn't experienced in months: hope. These strange, violent creatures from the quarantine zone might actually be able to save them. The battle began at dawn, Veltari time. The massive hive fleet had arrived during the night, their bioships glowing like diseased jellyfish against the star field. There were over 200 of them, each one the size of a small city, their organic hulls pulsing with stolen life energy from the worlds they had consumed. The creatures moved in perfect coordination, like a school of predatory fish hunting for their next meal. Admiral Tom Carter watched from his command deck as the enemy formation approached. The hive ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, their translucent skin revealing the complex organ systems beneath. Massive tentacles writhed around each vessel, and bioluminescent patterns flickered across their surfaces as they communicated with each other through some kind of biological network. All fighters, launch immediately, Carter ordered into his headset. Bombers, you are cleared for chemical weapon deployment. Let's see how these bugs like a taste of their own medicine. The space around the human fleet exploded into motion. Hundreds of small fighter craft launched from carrier ships, their engines leaving brilliant trails of light as they accelerated toward the enemy. Behind them came the heavy bombers, each one carrying specially designed payloads that Dr. Rebecca Brooks and her team had developed in just 2 days of frantic research. The first wave of fighters hit the hive formation like angry hornets attacking a larger predator. Their laser cannons and missile systems were designed to fight metal ships with shields and armor, but they adapted quickly to this new enemy. Instead of trying to punch through heavy plating, they targeted the soft spots where the bioship's organs were closest to the surface. Captain Ryan Foster was leading the second wave attack from his assault cruiser when he saw the bombers reach their targets. Each bomber released a cloud of modified insecticide that had been weaponized specifically for these creatures. The chemical compounds were based on pesticides that human farmers had been using for centuries, but concentrated and refined to attack the nervous systems of organisms this size. The effect was immediate and devastating. The first hive ship to be hit with the chemical payload began convulsing violently, its massive tentacles thrashing in all directions. The bioluminescent patterns on its skin flickered wildly as its nervous system went haywire. Within minutes, the creature was dead, its lifeless bulk drifting in space like a massive piece of organic debris. But the real genius of Dr. Brooks' weapon became clear when the chemical cloud spread to the other bioships. Because the hive creatures shared a collective consciousness, the neurological damage spread through their mental network like a computer virus. Ship after ship began having seizures as their shared nervous system collapsed under the assault. Target their command nodes, Foster ordered his marine units as they prepared for boarding operations. We need to get inside those things and plant charges in their central nervous systems. The Marines under Foster's command were equipped with the latest powered armor suits, each one a miniature tank that could keep a human alive in the most hostile environments imaginable. As the assault shuttles approached the dying hive ships, Foster could see that the bioships were bleeding some kind of acidic fluid into space. The stuff would eat through most alien technology in seconds. Remember your training, Foster told his troops as they prepared to board the first enemy vessel. These things are dying, but they're still dangerous. Watch for defensive organisms and stay in formation. The boarding operation was like entering the belly of a massive sea monster. The corridors inside the hive ship were lined with what looked like living tissue, and the air was filled with toxic gases that would have killed most species instantly. But the human Marines moved through the nightmare environment like they were taking a walk in the park. Elder Nith, watching the battle through long-range sensors from the safety of a Veltari medical ship, couldn't believe what he was seeing. How do they survive in there, he gasped, watching human soldiers walk through corridors that were literally on fire, filled with poisonous atmosphere and covered in acid. Admiral Carter's response came through the communication channel, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Humans evolved on a death world, Elder Nith. Poisonous atmosphere, predators that hunt in packs, natural disasters that can wipe out entire continents. This is just Tuesday for us. The most amazing part wasn't how humans fought, but how they thought. When the hive mind realized it was facing true apex predators for the first time in its existence, it made a critical error. Instead of fighting to the death like most prey species would, it tried to retreat. The collective consciousness ordered all remaining bioships to flee the system immediately. But humans had been hunting prey that tried to run away for thousands of years. The moment the hive ships turned to flee, human pursuit vessels were already moving to intercept them. Fast attack craft and long-range interceptors chased down every fleeing bioship with the relentless efficiency of persistence hunters. By the end of the day, the hive fleet was completely destroyed. The cleanup took 6 weeks. Not the fighting, that was over in 3 days once the human fleet arrived. The actual extermination of every last hive organism in the galaxy took longer because humans were thorough when it came to pest control. They hunted down every bioship that had tried to flee, tracked down every spore that might have drifted between star systems, and sterilized every planet that had been touched by the hive infection. Admiral Tom Carter stood on the steps of the Veltari Parliament building, looking out at a crowd of millions of grateful aliens. The rabbit-like creatures had gathered from across their home system to celebrate the end of their nightmare. Their soft fur rippled in the gentle breeze, and their large eyes were bright with tears of joy and relief. Many of them held up signs written in their flowing script, though the translation devices showed messages like, "Thank you, human warriors," and "Defenders of life." The Veltari had rebuilt quickly once the threat was gone. Their cities had been damaged but not destroyed, and their natural harmony with their environment meant that new growth was already beginning to cover the scars left by the hive feeding. Crystal spires caught the light of their twin suns, and floating gardens drifted between the buildings like living clouds. Elder Nith approached the podium with a formal document written on what looked like living paper that shifted colors as the words changed. "Admiral Carter," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd through translation speakers, "the Veltari Confederation would like to offer humanity full membership in our alliance. You would have equal voting rights with our 12-member species and access to all our technologies and trade networks." Carter looked at the document for a long moment, then set it aside without reading it. The crowd of aliens fell silent, confused by his response. They had expected the humans to jump at the chance to join their peaceful confederation. "We appreciate the offer, Elder Nith," Carter said, his voice amplified by the sound system. "But we're not really the joining type. Humans don't do well with committees and voting and long discussions about policy. We prefer to keep things simple." Captain David Lee stepped forward with a much shorter document written on plain human paper. He was a lean man with gray hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from years of negotiating with hostile aliens. "What we're proposing instead are protection contracts. Think of it as insurance for your species." He activated a holographic display that showed a simple contract written in multiple alien languages. "Here's how it works. You call us when there's an existential threat to your species, something that could wipe you out or enslave your entire population. We show up and eliminate the threat completely. In exchange, we get trade rights with your worlds and access to your scientific databases." The Veltari leaders looked confused. This wasn't how galactic diplomacy was supposed to work. Elder Nith's ears twitched nervously as he studied the contract terms. But what about cultural exchange? Shared governance? Mutual defense pacts? Carter shook his head. "We're not interested in running your governments or telling you how to live. That's your business. But when something shows up that wants to eat your entire species, that becomes our business. We're good at solving those kinds of problems." The news of humanity's victory against the hive spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Within weeks, every civilized species knew that the predators from the quarantine zone had emerged and wiped out the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever known. The reaction was mixed, to say the least. On the peaceful worlds of the Gentle Alliance, herbivore species that had never known violence watched recordings of human marines fighting through toxic environments and wondered if they had traded one nightmare for another. On the trading worlds of the Commercial Federation, profit-minded species saw opportunity in humanity's offer of protection services. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, the predator species that had been locked away in quarantine zones for thousands of years began to stir. The Zephyrian Empire was the first to make contact. They were a species of reptilian humanoids who had been quarantined after they conquered half their local star cluster 3,000 years ago. Their ambassador, a scarred veteran named General Korath, arrived at Earth within a month of the Hive's destruction. "We have been watching," Korath told the human leadership during a closed meeting at Earth Defense Command. "For millennia, we have been told that predator species were contained for the safety of the galaxy. But now we understand the truth. You were not locked away to protect others from you. You were locked away to protect you from becoming bored." Admiral Carter nodded slowly. The galaxy had its system. Shepherds protecting their flocks, keeping everything peaceful and stable. But what happens when something worse than shepherds shows up? What happens when the wolves come calling? Other predator species began emerging from their quarantine zones. The Kraken Confederacy, a group of tentacled warriors from the deep ocean worlds. The Steel Pack, cybernetic hunters who had replaced most of their biology with combat machinery. The Ghost Fleet, energy beings who could possess enemy ships and turn them against their own fleets. None of them wanted to join the peaceful confederations that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. Instead, they followed humanity's example, offering their services as problem solvers for threats that normal diplomacy couldn't handle. The galaxy was changing. For thousands of years, it had been a place of shepherds and sheep, where conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise. Now it had wolves. And the wolves were very, very good at their job.